I think in general, the original cogen project. So the thing is, we don't really have an infrastructure or an organization that does these types of projects, which means I've kind of worn it exclusively on my back and sometimes on the chin. And so, yeah, my beard used to be brown before I started this project. So it's certainly been a challenge, but I think because we were being driven by trying to make the business better and being able to supply our customers more effectively and more efficiently, I think there was definitely an openness to hearing what this looks like.
Are you looking to unlock the value of a hybrid on-site energy system for your business and realize the huge benefits that come with that, but facing potential trials and tribulations? Learn how to streamline your process through today's conversation with Charlie.
Yeah, we're super excited to be joined by Charlie Marquez, who is the Senior Manager of Environmental Health and Safety and Facilities at Kirkhill Incorporated. Kirkhill is an aerospace manufacturing firm that does elastomer products or rubbers for the commercial airline and aerospace industries. And Charlie has really been on the journey over the last 4 years in deploying his hybrid on-site energy project that includes both a combined heat and power system, solar, and a battery energy storage system. And we're super excited for all the learnings that he is going to share with us today. So welcome, Charlie. All right, Charlie, thank you for joining us. We're super excited to have you. And as we always do, we want to learn a little bit about yourself. So maybe we can open with what are you passionate about?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think that there's not too many things that I'm more passionate about than the sport of football, and this time of year is a big one for us. We're still really involved in the program where both of my boys graduated. My youngest is off playing college football, so we get a chance to go up and see him a couple times this year. That's exciting. But his alma mater down here in North Orange County just completed a 10-0 regular season. It was exciting. We got bumped up. We're usually like a Division 9 team. We got bumped up to Division 5 in the playoffs. This last weekend, we were going against the number 2 seed in the Division 5 playoffs, and we were winning all the way up until about 30 seconds to go in the game, and ended up losing at the last minute. So yeah, against Palos Verdes. So that was a bit of a heartbreaking way to kick into the weekend. So, but yeah, we spend a lot of time, serving in that capacity. My wife's one of the photographers. We're in the booster program, and so we spent a lot of time doing that kind of stuff. And looking forward to my son's sophomore year next year, and getting able to see him a little bit more too. So yeah, it's definitely one of my biggest passions. So
I'm sure, like you and I have talked before, and I know you're a very proud dad, and you're getting a lot of miles going to visit his games this year. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I've worn out a bit of I-5 between Orange County and Redding, California. So yeah, so I'll give a shout out to the Simpson Redhawks, brand new football program. So this is their first full year. They'll be joining a conference, Frontier Conference next year. But yeah, all the bumps and bruises of a brand new program. So most of the team is freshmen, and they're playing against teams that are stacked with juniors and seniors that are, 23, 24 years old. And so it hasn't been a great year statistically, but it's certainly a historic one for his school.
That's so good. What position does he play?
So he started the season. He got recruited as a defensive tackle, but ended up switching to offensive line, and then promptly broke his hand. And so he's a medical red shirt this year. So he hasn't gotten a chance to play. Practiced a lot, went through all the motions, but yeah, broke his hand and hasn't had a chance to play this year.
And did you play yourself growing up?
I did. So that's a bit of a bitter story. I was a punk kid and got copped an attitude with my high school football coach and decided to teach him a lesson by quitting the team. And the only one who regretted that decision was me.
Oh no.
So so I've been reliving that. Yeah, coached a little bit of Pop Warner and high school football as my boys were growing up. So
that's great. And so where did you grow up, Charlie?
So I grew up not too far from where I'm sitting right now. So southeast Los Angeles County and North Orange County is where I grew up. Early years in Anaheim, not too far from here. And then my family moved to Whittier, which for anybody listening is right on the LA Orange County border. So literally where I live now, I'm in LA County, 4 doors from Orange County. So
how did you find yourself as a punk kid?
Yeah, well, it's just I guess kids in general can be turn into punks. Yeah, my coach, I missed a couple practices, and my coach decided to teach me a lesson by making me sit a couple of games, and didn't tell me when I was going to get back on the field, and it just seemed like the games keep coming, and I knew I was best player at my position, but he kept sitting me on the bench to teach me a lesson, and so I finally got fed up with it and decided to quit the team. And at which time he promptly told me, I was going to start you this week. I don't know if that was just to get me or if that was the truth, but either way, it was certainly led into some regrets.
What's the best lesson you took away from that you've carried through your career?
Yeah, I guess I think it's easy to make excuses for bad decisions. You know, I don't want to bore everybody with the details, but it had to do with scheduling. That's why I missed the practices, is that my schedule didn't allow me to be there for the first part of practice. And so I just took it upon myself to take the whole practice off. And so until I can get my schedule fixed. And then when I got the schedule fixed, I showed up back at practice, and the coach didn't appreciate me making that decision on my own. And so I think certainly, you know, making decisions without properly investigating it can lead to some bad outcomes, and maybe we'll revisit that at some point during this podcast.
Oh, we definitely will. That'll be great. And so, give us the highlights of that time in school to your role today, and give us an insight into how you got here and what you're responsible for today.
Yeah, sure. It's a little bit serendipitous maybe that we're recording on Veterans Day, because that's where I actually got my technical training. So I was, you know, my punk kid carried on in my early days of college. So I was a perennial enroller in college, but I wasn't so good at finishing. So I probably started 2 or 3 semesters of school and just found the beach and other things more appealing than school, at least in my early days, and just decided, you know what, I better choose another path. And so, I ended up joining the Navy. Maybe I watched Top Gun one too many times. And so, ended up joining the Navy. And, you know, as any smart guy would do, I just said, you know what, if I'm going to be in, I'm going to make the most of this. So I literally chose my path by whichever offered the longest schooling and the most training. And so ended up choosing electronics tech. And so I did well in school in the Navy, and ended up being able to at least choose which coast I got to go to. And I chose San Diego. Ended up in San Diego, and eventually actually got attached to a SEAL team. And so I spent my 4.5 years in the Navy in a SEAL support role in Coronado, California. So if you've got to be in the military, you know, 4.5 years in Coronado with a back gate of the compound that opens up to the ocean and the beach is not a bad way to go. It also served as the backbone for my career, at least technically. And then as I got out into industry, cut my teeth in industry, started out as an electronics tech for a semiconductor company. First job out of the military, worked for a company that made solar cells and solar panels for space. We did the panels for Mars Pathfinder, for the original space station. that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, that company got bit by what they called the tech flu around 2000, and a lot of other companies as well. Tech companies ended up belly up, and so I just chose, so we were in manufacturing and just kind of weaved my way in the manufacturing industry to stay in Southern California, realizing that manufacturing in Southern California can be a challenge. So I did food, I did some consumer goods with paints, and those companies all were leaving California. And I chose to stay. I could have stayed with any of those companies and relocated to other places in the country, and just decided to stay in California. And that's how I ended up in aerospace, one of the businesses that isn't going to leave California because our customers are here. So spent about 6 years with what was formerly Goodrich, is now Collins. Brief stint at a senior aerospace up in the San Fernando Valley. Did not like that commute into San Fernando Valley from North Orange County. And so ended up through some former colleagues where I am today at a company called Kirkhill. So we make rubber parts for both commercial aircraft, military, and space applications.
Beautiful. Yeah. And you're right. That is one area of manufacturing that is not leaving California anytime soon, even with all the challenges and the energy challenges in particular. And so,
for sure,
Charlie, at Kirkhill, what has your role been? What has it evolved into? And how did you get involved with the energy systems that supply the power to your manufacturing process?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my role has kind of technically been the same for the last, it just celebrated 8 years, but it's expanded. When I got here, I was hired as the facilities and environmental health and safety manager, which is still technically my title, but it was actually just me and one other guy. He was kind of holding the fort down in both areas. And so I quickly just pivoted and turned him into my maintenance manager and hired a environmental health and safety manager, and have since hired a couple of facilities engineers to help me execute capital projects, and built out the rest of the environmental health and safety team. So there wasn't much of a team there. They were just kind of holding things together with shoestrings and duct tape, and we've kind of built out a much more robust organization. Energy has always been a challenge here in California, especially from a cost standpoint. And we just started looking at opportunities primarily for cost savings. And we did, in the early days, some of the most basic. We did the LED retrofit. We're a large facility. We're sitting on about 20 acres, about 400,000 square feet under roof. And so that's no small savings. I mean, that was a pretty significant savings, something like an 8-month payback with, pretty good annual return for something like that. We also brought in our first storage project that was primarily for peak shaving, third-party company called STEM, who has, proprietary software. They put in a 500 kilowatt hour Tesla battery bank here that helped us manage our peak load here. And those were easy payback projects, no problem. And we had looked at solar and cogen at that point, and we were just like, those are big projects, not sure we really want to tackle that right now. But then we kind of backed into that world, because the driver for all that was operational excellence. We had some really old, antiquated equipment that was still getting the job done, but there were some quality issues, low yield, high manpower consumption, all that type of thing. And so we wanted to upgrade at least a portion of our plant. So we picked a pilot area that had some really old equipment, a lot of downtime, that type of thing, and decided that was going to be our pilot. I like to call it Kirkhill 2.0. And so we came in to an area that I'm sure your audience doesn't know how you cure rubber, but we cure it primarily here through heated compression molding. So you got a big press that has heated platens, and you stick a steel or aluminum mold with a bunch of rubber in it, and you squeeze it and hold it tight under heat, and that's how you cure the rubber. So we had a section here with about 30 of those presses that were previously heated by steam. Like I said, low yield, high downtime, high labor consumption. And we gutted that area completely, remodeled it, epoxy floors, new paint, all that stuff. And we're going to roll in some brand new presses. And the presses that we were looking at were electric heated versus steam heat. And so, first of all, that's a huge load on your electrical infrastructure, which we didn't have the infrastructure to support. And secondly, the ongoing operational costs of running electric versus steam was in California. Our Edison rep would have been happy. He probably would have, bought a new vacation home on that. But we just realized this is not going to work. So we started looking at all kinds of different ideas. And that's when we first revisited cogen. So we were looking at, CHP, and we have plenty of heat load here that we could utilize that heat for. But the reality is you're going to have this large capital expenditure, and you're just going to offset a new electrical load. So that doesn't really pencil as a good project. And so we just kind of kept scratching our heads, and then just kind of dawned on me one day. We did have a few of those compression presses here that are heated by not steam or electric, but with thermal fluid. Because with a flowing thermal fluid, you get a nice temperature profile. And it's really, really great for high yield. But it just dawned on me that, hey, what if we installed a CHP and used the waste heat from the CHP to heat thermal fluid? So there would be no new electrical load, and that we used the cogen to offset existing plant load. So reduce plant load, get free heat for the new presses. Now we're cooking. So, worked with a couple of different suppliers, crunched all those numbers. We actually engaged the DOE. They've got some free resources for CTAP, I think they call it, for CHP implementation. Also, our gas company has some free resources, and so they all vetted my numbers and my engineering ideas, and they said, "I think it's going to work, and I think you could make this a viable project." And so that's the route that we went. And so we started that in 2021. Beautiful time to start a large scale project right on the tail end of a pandemic, with a completely jacked up supply chain worldwide. And so we're trying to bring presses from Taiwan. And so, yeah, it was a character building experience for sure.
Charlie, from the moment you started thinking about, we've got a mounting pain point, we've got an energy need that's going to increase, to starting to then vet the options, what was the time lag there? And then how long did it take you to go from there to feeling like we've got a good project and now let's go and execute on it?
9 to 12 months. Because we looked at all kinds of things. First thing we looked at, what would it take to bolster the infrastructure of our plant to actually be able to support this electrically. And then, as I mentioned, we looked at the implementation of cogen to offset the new load. And so each one of those is, to get a couple of different quotes and some engineering eyes on it is an iterative process. And so, each one of those steps probably took, 2 to 3 months, with some discussions in between. You got budgeting year overlap and that kind of thing. So yeah, it took probably the better part of a year before we actually had a design that we felt like was going to work.
What would the typical capital planning cycle look like? How far ahead are you typically expected to think for the business? And then what are your typical internal hurdle rates that you're looking for to make a good project?
Sure. I think we would typically plan, a year and a half or so out. I mean, we have a budget year, but something large scale like this, you'd probably identify it in the middle of the prior year, right? And so we already have an idea of what's coming up for the upcoming year. A typical project, that's where I think in California, it's funny, I've been to a lot of these energy conferences and all that, and people complain that energy projects don't pencil where they're from. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you're paying 6 cents a kilowatt hour for, your hydroelectric. I'm having a hard time feeling sorry for you. So those kind of things tend to pencil out a little bit better with our high cost of energy here. But I think typical manufacturing ROI, you're looking for something south of 36 months, but something that's going to deliver this kind of savings, somewhere, around $750,000 a year in savings, you get a little bit more leeway. So, we were able to put something together that was just a little over 4 years, but we did have to bundle difference. We had some labor savings. We had some quality savings, meaning we're going to scrap less material than we did before, along with the electricity savings. And all of those things bundled together, we're able to fund not only, but not just the cogen, but also the new equipment and the new facility area. I think it would have been probably would have been a lot shorter payback just on the energy piece, but we were also buying new production equipment and renovating a portion of the plant, and it paid for all of that.
And were you ever experiencing any power quality or power outage issues as well that you could offset some sort of benefits against?
Not so much, except that we're part of a program in California called BIP, which is it's just an interruptible base interruptible program, I think is what it stands for. So we just we get a couple cent a kilowatt hour break on our bill, and in exchange for we'll reduce on in a pinch for Edison. And so two things. Number one, is if there is no interruptible event, they always have a practice event that you still have to shut down for. And it always ends up coming right at the end of our fiscal year. So that's a pain in the neck. And then we did have 1 year where we had several interruptions. And one of them came in on a Friday evening, and we didn't get the signal for it. And so we didn't shut down. So we ran through it at like 9x the normal rate. And so that was just incredibly expensive. So there's definitely some cost avoidance things that we were able to take advantage of. So, and also overall, we were able to reduce the steam consumption of the overall plant. So even our boilers are running at a lower rate than they were before. So there's all kinds of bundled savings. And so I think I even spoke at one of the SED events about this whole idea of making sure you capture all of the possible savings there to make your ROI, appealing to those that are going to be approving it.
Yeah, there's many different value streams. Charlie, you've mentioned on as you've described this, the combined heat and power system. But I know from previous discussions that you and I have had, you've also have a decent size solar array and then a battery energy storage system. Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics of the overall? I'll call it a hybrid energy system. How big are we talking? And walk us through the process of kind of, okay, we've identified that there's a project here. How did you go from that to okay, we're starting construction? Or all the way through to today?
Sure. So I think maybe we can talk a little bit later on a different question on the CHP. So that's, I know you and I have talked about the pain points of all of this. So
we'll come back to that.
Yeah. So the CHP so we'll get back to that. So the CHP is a 1.3 megawatt quad microturbine unit. So there's actually 4 turbines, and that'll come into play for us because in all likelihood, we'll probably, especially when we get the solar online, be running 3 microturbines Monday through Friday and 2 microturbines on the weekend, just because of our fluctuating plant load. And so, but it's capable with all 4 turbines running to supply up to 1.3 megawatts. And then we're starting construction actually this week on our 750 kilowatt solar array. So I'm in the throes of relocating parking because we're doing carport parking, and so we've expanded one of our parking lots, and we're closing it a little bit at a time, and opening this gate at this time and closing this gate at this time. So it's a little hectic around here. We're all around that installation, and so we chose this time of year because we'll be closed for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and so there's a little bit of time when nobody's going to be parking here, and so we thought we'd take advantage of that. So we'll probably have that online and producing early springtime.
Excellent. And then the battery energy storage, is that still that STEM system, or is there a...
Yeah, so yeah, it's still that's a leased system from STEM, though STEM has been quite helpful. We realize we're probably going to we're going to need to repurpose that, because the reality is we're not going to have any peaks here, and in 4 months or so we're not going to have any peaks to shave, and so we'll be exporting during daylight and importing minimal amounts in the dark, and so I'm sure there's a way we can utilize that, maybe to we'll have to make some decisions. So I'll be looking to collect some data and see how the performance of all that goes. And so right now we're planning to run it in a semi-manual mode, right? The solar is just going to produce. We've got some smart controls on there that will just export when available and import when necessary. But I'm sure there's some ways as we move forward and mature that we'll be able to utilize all of those assets, in conjunction with one another to maximize each one of them.
So Charlie, I was going to ask why, what prompted the solar array? I mean, 750 kW is a good sized system, and one that's a solar carport at that. I mean, I think oftentimes people hear solar canopies or carports, and that is the most expensive form of solar. But what drove the decision to include that in your system?
Yeah, I think again, even with the CHP, we still weren't supplying all of our electrical needs, and with the high cost of electricity. And we were able to get in on the tail end of NEM 2.0. So with the ability to export at full retail value, there's and knowing that we would be still importing from the grid in the evenings and being able to offset that. So basically, not completely eliminating our bill, so to speak, from Edison. I think that still made sense. And so, yeah, I think for us, it's not really an option. We're in a building that was built in the 1940s. And I call it a building loosely because it's not a building. It's a series of 15 Butler buildings kind of stacked together. So if you look at our building on Google Earth, especially if you do the old tilt feature on Google Earth, you'll realize our rooftop looks like the Swiss Alps. Just goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's littered with skylights, which are a great feature. But solar panels, well, first of all, it's a tin roof that I just put a $750,000 foam cap on for insulation and water resistant reasons. And it's been wonderful for that. Certainly lowered the summertime temperature in the whole building. So that's great. But I didn't want to go punch 1,500 holes in it with solar panels. And secondly, I'm not sure we would have got a permit to do so on that type of construction. And then thirdly, you have to be so far away from the skylights that it would have been a bit of a nightmare on installation. The thing would have ended up stringing across so much of our roof. It just didn't make sense. So it was either carport or nothing, and we were able to make the finances work.
What was your process, Charlie, for actually procuring that solution? Did you go to market and pre-qualify vendors and then select the top one, or did you have vendors coming to you trying to sell you on the solar system?
So both. You can imagine there's probably no shortage of cold calls and all that. So we talked to the big ones. So we contacted some directly. We talked to Tesla. We talked to trying to think of the other big one that we talked to. It'll come to me eventually. And then we also at one of the or a couple of the SED events, we connected with a couple of those suppliers. And they were all pretty good, but we had actually gotten in touch with a supplier here in South Orange County that was someone that worked for that company, used to be a colleague of someone who used to work here, and just one of those kind of relationships. And so I said, well, I'll talk to him. And turns out they were great. A lot of the companies, when they realized that we had a CHP system, we had a cogen system that wasn't yet commissioned, so there's no real data, and that in order to make their financials, they're going to have to actually model what the expected production of the CHP is, and then try to model their solar on top of that. Probably half the companies just no bid. They're like, that's outside of our capability. And so the company that we ended up going with, I don't know if it's okay to talk to them. It's Pacifico Power. We'll give them a shout out. They work with us, and I unfortunately, I exercise them every which way. What about this? What about that? And they would remodel it over and over and over again. And they were troopers. And then I did meet a company called Mag Energy. They're a Mag Construction, Mag Energy. I think they're a silver supplier at SED or something like that. They've been there quite a bit. They were great too. They basically, when I gave them some particulars, they came in with a system that was very close to what Pacifico offered as far as finance. But I'm like, why, I can't really change. These guys have been with me all along, and they're local. So that's how we ended up.
Are they purely constructing it, or are they financing it as well? Or are you financing the system directly?
Yeah, no. So our company prefers to purchase rather than any kind of power purchase agreement or anything like that. And that scared off probably a third of the solar suppliers too, because a lot of those companies are their whole model is, they own it and sell you the power, and they have an built-in income stream, and our company would prefer to own it and take all the profits.
Yeah, that's great. And how did you find the process, Charlie, of the stakeholder management within your organization? These are big decisions to make.
Yeah.
How did that process develop from probably a bit of apprehension and maybe not giving you the time of day to people either being on board with it and excited about it? Like, what was that journey like? How did you navigate it? And how did the executive leadership team think about it today?
I think in general, the original cogen project. So the thing is, we don't really have an infrastructure or an organization that does these types of projects, which means I've kind of worn it exclusively on my back and sometimes on the chin. And so, yeah, my beard used to be brown before I started this project. So it's certainly been a challenge, but I think because we were being driven by trying to make the business better and being able to supply our customers more effectively and more efficiently, I think there was definitely an openness to hearing what this looks like or what it might be like. And so I think that was okay. There was scrutiny on the financials. Sometimes they're like, go back to the drawing board, think about this, think about that. And so there was definitely an iterative process. And then on the solar, I started right after before we even started constructing on the CHP, I had already put together my initial solar proposals. And, the first few got shot down. They're like, all right, let me see your cogen work first, and then I'll give you some money for solar. And so we actually have proven the CHP, though it's not running. It's not currently running at the moment. We can talk about how that happened in a few minutes. But I think the sunsetting of the NEM 2.0 kind of helped push the solar like it's now or never. The financials are going to be significantly impacted if we don't pull the trigger now. And so that certainly helped get that project across the finish line.
Charlie, you've alluded to it a couple times. Maybe we can get into some of the meat here. It hasn't all been roses and good times. Where were some of the challenges along the way? And I know you've had some folks involved that made things more challenging than it could have been. So walk us through where the roadblocks, where the landmines were, and how others might be able to avoid some of those.
Yeah, I think the big one, the big takeaway is, choose your suppliers wisely. And so I mentioned a good supplier in the solar. The original integrator that we hired for the CHP is where all my troubles began. He actually came in with a fairly large energy consulting company. So he pulled the wool over their eyes too. He came in as their CHP expert. And so they backed out pretty early on in the project, and he kind of stuck around. And so the good news is the equipment that he at least led us to was good. And I think it was the right choice for us. We chose the quad microturbine equipment. Some of the other suppliers were all looking at ICEs. They were looking at internal combustion engines, which can be high maintenance items as well as environmentally challenging. You're talking about adding additional equipment to abate the emissions and all of that, as opposed to the microturbine solution that we selected the configuration we purchased it in with the built-in heat exchangers. It's a CARB registered piece of equipment, meaning we just have to register it with the AQMD. It doesn't require a separate air permit, which is a huge advantage, especially for a company where we have a large footprint, but we're staffed fairly lean. So some of the places we visited with these internal combustion CHPs, they had a whole maintenance department just dedicated to the CHP and, running it and maintaining it and maintaining the permits. And we're like, that's just not for us. So yeah, big thing. We realized though that, our integrator was kind of in over his head from an engineering standpoint. He had under engineered, some of the things in the project. And at some point, through a series of conversations and letters and all that kind of stuff, we ended up just having to cut our ties with him and cut him loose. And I had to take over the project myself and work with some of the subcontractors directly. It became a bit of a mess. You can imagine there's some legal ramifications, subcontractors not getting paid, liens filed against our company, all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, subcontractors aren't getting paid, and so projects delayed. City building permits expire because if I'm a contractor, I'm not getting paid. I'm not going to go back and pay the fees to. So by the time all the dust settles, then it's a comedy of errors. Now we've got new characters at the city that know nothing about this project originally. And so now they're making us jump through hoops to reopen the permits. And so it's just been one thing after another. And so it looks like we're going to get the ball across the goal line before the end of the calendar year here. And one of the big things was that the integrator failed to do was to file the interconnect application with Edison in a timely manner. So we get the project completely constructed and realize we're not anywhere close to having an approved interconnect application, so we can't run this thing. And Edison comes back and like, not only can you not run it, here's $170,000 worth of hardware that you need to install on the front end of your system, between your system and our grid, before we'll let you run it. You got to pay for it, and we're going to design it, install it, and maintain it. So, and we don't operate at the same pace as manufacturing, and so that was a year delay in and of itself. So, many lessons learned. We can go down any number of rabbit holes there to talk about the details of each one of those things, but it's definitely been a challenge. I've certainly learned a lot more about the inner workings of Southern California Edison and California politics and all kinds of things that will serve me well, I think, in the long run. So I can be the cautionary tale to many folks, and I'm certainly willing to be a resource to anybody who wants to reach out and talk through these details or these challenges. But so that's kind of where it's left us right now. So we're expecting our building permits this week to reinstitute those things. Those will get closed out quite quickly because the work has already been done. We just need to make a few tweaks and get some things cleaned up, and then Edison will schedule to come and install their hardware. And then we'll begin the commissioning process. Hopefully all of that, we don't run into too many delays over the holidays with all of that. So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, sounds like there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and especially with construction starting on the carport solar array this week, there's a lot of excitement. What are some of the misconceptions that maybe you had going into this whole process, or that you think other business leaders have when thinking about going down this path?
Yeah, I think I don't know about misconceptions, but maybe it is a misconception. One of the things just to be aware of is that, especially in the space that we're in manufacturing, the utility might be just as new at this as you are. So this has been a learning experience for Southern California Edison too. They're especially the combination of CHP and solar. They're like, basically they're bringing out whole teams of people to come and observe what we're doing, to take lessons learned. And at times it feels like they're kind of making it up as we go. And so they don't have, a boilerplate on how this is all supposed to go. They have some boilerplate stuff for individual items, but nothing like what we're doing. And so they've just basically told us, look, this is a one of a kind in this area. So, we're kind of learning as we go too. And I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what I expected. I kind of expected them to be the experts, but I guess they're the experts on what they do, not necessarily on what we're trying to do. And so they're trying to figure out how to make that work on their grid. So that was definitely a challenge. The other thing is just I guess I kind of knew that, most of the folks that I've encountered that are doing these types of things tend to be in the nonprofit arena, hospitals, universities, that kind of thing, where, 7-8 year payback's okay. But yeah, I guess it was, I knew that was at least anecdotally the case, but yeah, I've found very few manufacturing companies that are doing what we're doing. So we'll see. No guts, no glory, I guess. Haven't seen any glory yet, and a lot of my guts spilled, but we'll see if we can pull that all together here soon.
And if everything had gone to plan, Charlie, like what are the economic benefits to the business?
Yeah, I think we're probably talking about 80+% reduction in electricity costs. And then things like right now, I've talked to our rep several times about, whether or not they want us to exit BIP. And he said, well, you're not doing anything that precludes you from participating in BIP. So, but with our systems running, we'll never be running above what our actual reduction number is. So we'll be running below the threshold that they ask us to reduce to in a BIP event. And so we can continue to benefit from a couple cents per kilowatt hour on whatever it is that we actually draw from the grid. And meanwhile, never really have to worry about ever reducing, because we will never be pulling that much from the grid. Maybe over time we'll adjust that to get maybe a little bit better price on what we're buying and raise that or lower that threshold a little bit. But yeah, so I think in general, around an 80% reduction in overall electrical costs, which is not insignificant.
Yeah. And do you feel like this is essential to the viability of the business in the future? Obviously, more and more businesses are being squeezed. And if you can be competitive in the industry through being cost optimized, is this essential to you continuing to win and retain contracts? Or is this profits to your bottom line? Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? I mean, every corporation is expected. We're running a business, not a charity, and so there is certainly a bottom line component, but it also, as you mentioned, if we're competing against other California companies, and we're paying 80% less for energy, we can get a little bit more aggressive in our pricing.
Yeah.
Or that also frees up, if we're spending less money on electricity, that also allows us to spend more money on innovation and other areas to improve the business that aren't just getting absorbed by energy costs.
That's right. And then have you seen any ancillary benefits around emission reduction? Like, are you able to use that in marketing materials? Are you seeing this appealing to your customers, to your employees, to your finance backers?
Yeah, I think we've only kind of scratched the surface on that. We're working with a company that might help us with kind of capturing all of that. Some of it might be, real kind of hard currency credits. Others might be kind of, soft and squishy brochure type stuff, like you were just mentioning. But I think both are important, and it just seems like we're just starting to scratch the surface on how important that's going to be to our customer base globally. It seems like every time we get a new adjustment to, aerospace, we're famous for audits, right? We get audited by everybody. And so by customers, by third-party organizations like AS 9100, NADCAP, all of those are starting to include environmental components. Whether or not it has anything to do with what they're doing, just seems like that's the mood, is that those things are being included.
One thing I was curious about, Charlie, you've been kind of in this middle area, if you will, of you're having to convince your senior leaders, largely from an economic perspective, to get behind this. I'd imagine you're also having to field a lot of discussions throughout this entire process with your production teams on how is this going to impact production? Is it going to increase yield, reduce downtime, all these? Like, did you run into any major roadblocks, especially on the kind of the ground crew that manages production, and how did you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, I think there's been a bunch of those. Some of those early on, because as I mentioned, it was an operational improvement that kind of led us down this whole path to begin with. Now, that said, when you come in and gut 25% of your plant, there was a lot of planning that went on the front end. You got to build ahead in some areas. We had to increase the ability to produce in other departments to absorb some of that stuff. So all those conversations were going on in the early days. I don't know if I mentioned before, when we first finished the construction on the CHP, there was such a desire to get some benefit out of it, even though we knew we couldn't run grid parallel, that we islanded like a third of the plant and ran that third of the plant off the CHP, which was great. Not great, which was good. Because you're not able to run it at full efficiency because you have to overproduce because you don't have the grid backing you up. So it's not very efficient. And the microturbines are very sophisticated pieces of equipment with a lot of safeguards built in. And if they sense anything that seems minorly destructive, their first impulse is to shut themselves down, which when you're connected to the grid is not a big deal. You go figure out what happened and turn it back on, and you're taken from the grid for a little while. When you're completely running in isolation from the grid, a third of your plant is in blackout. So had to have those post conversations with, hey, what happened? Why are we all standing here in the dark and nothing's running? So kind of that ongoing negotiation, which eventually led us to not running the CHP until we can run it in grid parallel. But yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation. I still think, thankfully, I still have a job, and thankfully, there still seems to be a level of optimism and excitement about what this is all going to look like when it's online. It will be kind of a one of a kind, certainly for our corporation, but I think it's also a one of a kind in this area geographically. That's one of the things that we mentioned to our city building department. I'm like, hey, look, you guys, I don't think you realize this is a photo op for the mayor and everybody in your office to come and say, hey, look what we have over here. You guys don't have one of these. And so I think maybe they're kind of finally starting to get that.
I like that. Well, Charlie, thank you for blazing the trail and taking this head on. I know it's been a lot of your time, far much more of your time than I think you probably anticipated going into it.
Sure.
and you're still working through it, and we'll have you back on once everything is up and running and you're optimized and the ribbons have been cut and the celebrations have been had. I think it's a good time to move into our power surge round, and I am eager to hear your answer to the first question, which is, especially given all your deep experience in some of these things, if you could be any one energy technology, what would it be and why?
One thing that I've been hearing a lot about these micro nuke plants that are kind of a nuke plant in a box. I just think maybe I like a comeback story or an underdog story to go from Chernobyl to maybe the energy secret of the future seems like a kind of a cool comeback story.
Nice. Well, the hype around that right now. We'll see whether people are still hyping about it 5 or 10 years from now. It always feels like it's 10 years away. So we'll see whether the public can get behind it. I think the permitting is going to be the biggest challenge. But yeah, super exciting tech.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you've navigated this, Charlie, have you had any favorite areas of information or resources that you've consistently gone back to go on this learning curve?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned the SED conference a few times. I think getting that many people together around the same idea. I have colleagues as well as suppliers there, and then some people that are just giving out information, which I think is great. It's one of the more freely sharing communities that I've certainly been around. And I think even the folks at DOE and that are so willing to help. I think that was a nice surprise to know that those kind of resources are out there and available, especially for somebody that's doing it for the first time. So yeah, I think so.
Yeah, two great resources. And while we had connected prior, I really enjoyed the time that I've spent with you at the SED events as well. Before I ask this final question, anything that we haven't touched on, or any thoughts that you'd want to share with other business leaders that are thinking about going down this path?
Yeah, I think just maybe it's obvious, though, is that, the old saying, measure twice, cut once. I think definitely, do your due diligence. Who you partner with is huge. I think the good news is we got a really good electrical contractor / engineer that was part of the package deal with the integrator that was terrible. He happened to be a physical neighbor. Their businesses were next to each other, and so that's how he ended up being on the project. Turned out to be a great guy. He's done that work for us along with others. He's one of the guys that kind of shined the light on some of the stuff that was not right, saying, "Hey, Charlie, you really need to look at this. I know this guy's paying the bill, or at least supposed to be, but this isn't right." So having people that you really can trust and are true partners will make a huge difference in something like this, especially if you're new to it, like I was.
Yeah, amen. Well, to close, I'd be curious how you would finish this sentence, either personally or professionally, and especially in the context of the global energy transition. In my life, I will have been successful when.
I guess that one's maybe I'll go personal there. As a father to two young men, I would say when I'll be successful when both of my boys are on with their lives, leading their own families, serving God and being successful. I think I'll have considered myself a success.
Excellent.
Great. Good way to end. Charlie, this has been awesome. I think everything you've described is the reason we started VECKTA. We want to help you and future yous in the future navigate these challenges and pitfalls. And I think the reality is this is complex and it's hard, and you've done an amazing job of navigating it, because it's still definitely worth it. The outcomes that the business is going to gain for years and decades to come will probably make this last year or two hugely worthwhile. But feel your pain, and hopefully you don't have to go through it in future episodes as the corporation expands this more broadly.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate you having me on. And so, yeah, maybe next time we talk, I'll be FaceTiming you from the champagne bottle breaking across the CHP or the solar array.
Love that.
Love that. Yes. Charlie, appreciate the time. And we'll definitely have you back on once things are fully up and running.
Great.
Cheers. Dan, what an awesome discussion. Love the vulnerability and transparency that Charlie provided us. I think the reality is not enough business leaders today are talking about the risks and opportunities that they and their businesses are facing.
Yeah, and to put it into perspective, Charlie's mentioned that they really started this journey in 2021. And I was just looking at the industrial rates here in California. And from 2021 through to today, we've seen a 76% increase in energy rates here in California. So I don't know whether some of those figures that Charlie was saying as far as their energy cost savings were based on 2021 figures or today's figures, but that number is not going to slow down anytime soon. And so they're actually going to end up seeing much more substantial savings, I think, in the long run. I think the other thing that really stood out for me in this whole conversation was too often people think behind the meter energy system or distributed energy system on site and think solar only. And what we've learned in that conversation with Charlie is that there's tremendous benefits, especially in their case as a manufacturer, for having a hybrid system and leveraging a combined heat and power system with solar, with a battery, to yield what will ultimately be some pretty incredible results.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in this case, it seems to have been piecemeal together, based on opportunities that presented themselves, and Charlie kind of navigating the landscape as issues and manufacturing process reevaluations crept up. I think it demonstrates how these systems are modular and can be constantly evolved and expanded. But I think probably the biggest takeaway for me is if you'd have had the right support up front and been able to look at this, as a holistic opportunity and not be stuck with a supplier that knows about batteries and another one that knows about CHP and another that knows about solar. Actually being able to integrate that and really optimize what is the right combination of these technologies, and when should I deploy them, why should I deploy them, and then how do I tell that story to my leadership in order to get that endorsement and support. And I think the other big takeaway that everyone needs to have from this conversation is you need to select the right partners. And I think the reality is, as we see this every week, don't we, Dan, is customers who have tried to do it themselves and they've taken the first inbound non-solicited sales call from a solar developer or a battery provider, and they've been blinded by the potential cost savings without actually doing their due diligence and figuring out, have they actually deployed these projects before? Are they qualified to do so? Are they financially stable? Have they ever filed for an interconnection application before? Have they worked with this utility? I think we talk about this a lot. This is a localized and fragmented market, and there are very few good national players who can support facilities all across the country. And it's all about knowing who the right suppliers are for your particular needs, geography, system size, technologies, financial requirements. And I think that's really where we're bringing the most value in the market today, is helping buyers go and source suppliers as competitively as possible while actually maximizing their upside and minimizing their risk profile.
Certainly. And unfortunately, Charlie has spent an inordinate amount of time running after this. And I think there's a lot of companies and leaders out there that might have abandoned it along the way. Luckily, he's gutted it out. But hopefully, Charlie, as well as the work that we do, can help others avoid many of these mistakes.
Yeah, I think it'll hugely be beneficial for him, won't it? I think the reality is this system will pay for itself many, many times over. But how do we get to those results quicker, smarter, faster, in a really integrated and seamless way? I think huge opportunities to make this more accessible to many more in the market. But Charlie's lessons learned are massively valuable for everyone.
Certainly. We'll look forward to having him back on when he's up and running.
Exactly. All right. Good one, Dan. Catch you next time.
Cheers.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.